Welcome back, everybody, to the Quill and Query podcast. My name is Brandon Hall, and today not only am I joined by my wonderful co-host Ash, but we have two special guests as well, who you may know as the authors of Paragon Exordium. Joining us today for our very first guest episode of Quill and Query is Mikel Melwasul and David Tullius. So, how are you guys doing today?
Doing fantastic, sir. How are you?
I am doing wonderful, botched intro aside. David, how are you doing over there?
Doing great. It's been hectic, so keep that hectic energy going the rest of this time.
Well, thanks for joining us. We understand it's crazy for both of you guys recently, so this is really, hopefully it's a good reprieve, a good break from everything, and just talk shop.
Definitely. Well, we're super excited to have you guys as our very first guest on Quill and Query. Forgive us, botched intros and the like will probably be a recurring theme here because, like I said, it's our first guest episode. So just bear with my awkwardness as much as you can. But yeah, so typically what we like to do, we start Quill and Query with a quick reading update, sharing our thoughts on what we've been reading, and then kind of engaging with our viewers a little bit there. So I'll kick it off by saying the only thing I've been reading is the betas for Blades for Hire, the anthology that we're working on. They are wonderful. Everyone has done a great job, and it's been super exciting to see all the stories come together. I wish I could share more details, but you guys will just have to wait until the anthology is out, hopefully the end of this year. But that is all from me. I am still, like I said, stuck in the Blades for Hire betas, and I probably will be for a long time. So, Ash, what have you been reading this week?
I have picked up a book club book that I'm going to be doing with my mother because I'm going to visit my family next week. And it is The Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips. And of course, going through everyone's Blade for Hire anthologies drafts. So yeah, same.
Very cool. Mick, have you got any reading done this past week, or has it just been recovery mode?
I'm actually taking a break from reading for the rest of the year, and I say that, but then I just started 2 audiobooks at the same time, which doesn't count. It counts toward reading. I'm not going to start that whole drama, but it's a different way of absorbing the story that's a lot easier on me. So I started Atlas Creed's Armitage, which I have a special edition of, audiobook. Very fantastic, nice. Interesting sort of urban mystery fantasy thing. And then Flipside by Gentleman Lou, that's his username on TikTok. I don't know his actual name, how it's pronounced, but it's about these, a squid apocalypse, like these space aliens that jump on your heads, and it's really fun. It's really good. I'm quite enjoying it. I didn't know what I was getting into, but he narrates it and wrote it, and it's fantastic so far.
That's awesome.
That's really cool. I understand what you were saying about the audiobooks not counting to you, but it's it still counts as reading, because right. I'm the same way where I'm I'm not in the mood for reading, but I'll listen to an audiobook, so it makes sense.
Good.
David, have you done any reading these past couple weeks?
Oh boy, all of my books are now in boxes in the next room over, so my ability to read is I don't want to feel like a Luddite, but not nearly so much. I have been doing some research for various background topics, mostly pretty dry stuff. Things to support this, right? Old Boy Scout handbooks, book about atomic accidents, some weird background research things, but nothing fun, unfortunately, because we're in the middle of a move. So
fair enough. Actually, those things do sound fun, honestly, like atomic events.
A little dry.
Conceptually entertaining, but maybe prose-wise, not so much.
That's right. That's a good point.
Real quick, Nate. Yeah, I know the Dave is missing on the TikTok. I'm sorry. It'll be in the uploaded version. You can catch it on Spotify and on YouTube or anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. You'll be able to hear Dave's commentary. So watch us twice. Don't leave. But Dave, when you are packing your books, do you make the same mistake that I do and you put them all in one box and then realize it is ungodly heavy and impossible to move and you need to repack the entire thing? Or have you learned from that and not made that same stupid mistake?
I've learned nothing. So I am getting one more free move on the U.S. government's dime before I'm out of there. So I had people come and move it for me, which is all taken care of. from your tax dollars. So really appreciate that, paying your taxes. But yeah, they are all in the same boxes, and they are sitting there quite heavy next to my wife's board games and my kitchen. So
Love it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what TurboTax told me when I owed taxes last year. It was for Dave's move.
An itemized list.
Yeah. All right. Well, we don't have any podcast updates or audience questions to get into, but I do have. Oh, wait. Nope. Okay. I do have some indie releases to get into. Sorry. We have 2 indie releases to spotlight that we missed in our last episode. We have The Residency by Kayla Frederick that released October 1st. And then we have The Black Caladrius by J.R. Douglas. That'll be out November 5th. So shout out to both of those authors. Congratulations on the release. And be sure to check those out. Okay. We get into the fun part of our writing discussion. This is called the work in progress check-in. We like to give our readers or our viewers an update on our current works in progress. So, Ash, I'll let you go first. Do you have any writing updates?
No.
To be fair, you did have a major writing update last episode.
I did. I have taken a full break. Yeah, after finishing the short story, little over 20,000 words, I took a break and I stepped away. It's also just been a crazy time here. So, finishing up a very busy month, and I'm sure November will be very slow for me. So I'll have some writing updates in a few weeks.
Very cool. Well, as for me, I am nearly done with my short story. I am sitting at about 11,000 words. I'm shooting for 12. So,
cool.
I may need more to wrap it up because it keeps getting longer, but we'll see. I'm gonna try to tie it up in 12, and we'll see how that goes. But
give it all the time you need. Give it as much as it needs to tell itself.
I like not to limit myself to the word count too much. It's more just kind of a guideline. But
yeah, makes sense.
What about you, Mick and David? Do you guys have any writing updates as of late? Or
Mick's nodding at your not being tied to word count because it's just not a thing that he believes in.
It's a philosophy. That's like our writing philosophy: is word count is irrelevant. The story is done when the story is done, and then you worry about word count. That is a governing philosophy. I never track how many words I've gotten done in an amount of time because it's a distraction for me. I respect the people who do. I think it's a great way to track things, but for me, it's just background information that doesn't help me. As far as writing updates go, we're about 75% of the way through our second book, Paragon Exordium, and by 75%, I mean through the second draft. So we finished the first draft. We've been going back through by perspective, by POV. So with the first draft, we went by chapter. Now we've been going through by POV. So we've got 3 out of the 4 main POVs knocked out. Between the hurricane and Days Move, we haven't written anything in a month. But we only have the 1 POV left, and we're going to try and crank it out before the end of the year. We're very excited for it. We're anticipating some decent changes. One of the things we like to do with the second round of edits is really hone in on character voices and minor things. Now that we've got the broader story in, making sure everything flows correctly and stuff. But I did hear back from my alpha reader who's finished the first draft of everything. And his response to the final chapter was, "Is that the final chapter?" To which I said, "Yes." To which he responded, "You are devious. How dare you?" So that's a good sign.
It's always good feedback.
So real quick, I want to make sure I caught that correctly. Did you say you're trying to get the book out by the end of the year, or just the second draft done by the end of the year?
Just ready for beta readers by the end of the year.
Okay.
Gotcha. Hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that stuff, we will hopefully release sometime next year. That may be somewhat affected by the hurricane situation and all that. I have to do a Kickstarter this time. We'll see. But yeah, the goal is to release the book next year and have it ready for beta readers end of this year, start of next year.
Okay.
Great. It's a good timeline.
So, David, I think I don't know if we heard from you. Have you done any writing these past few weeks, or just?
Yeah, past few weeks, not so much. With the storms and then getting ready to move, it's been pretty rough, I think, for both of us. We're really pretty good about sticking to everything, and things sort of just came off the rails a little bit due to unforeseen circumstances. I knew I was going to be moving. I just didn't realize how much that was going to affect everything, including the rest of the house. So kind of interrupted a lot of stuff. I've piddled around with the side project that that I'm working on as well in our same kind of universe. It's gotten spurts of inspiration here and there, but that's about it. Going back and refining it, hard to do when all of your materials are packed up. So
yeah, very very much. That's cool though. It sounds like there will be more stuff coming in the shared universe of Paragon Exordium. Is there a name for like the overarching series, or is it
That's
just Paragon
actually
Exordium?
that's something we've been debating recently, and we've settled on the Galvorn saga.
Okay.
Yeah,
Ooh.
that's going to be the first 3 books, and all the novellas or any spinoffs in between that focus on those characters are all going to be part of the Galvorn saga. There was a lot of debate around doing like the Shattered Sky saga or the Shattered Sky series, since that's a major thing, but there's some use of Shattered Sky in a couple other books. We really wanted to make sure it's distinct enough to where when you're Googling it or looking up in any capacity, you're not going to potentially get mixed up with something else.
Yeah. Real quick, just to answer some questions in the chat. The name of the podcast is Quill and Query, and sorry for repeating this for the 10th time, but for those who are new, David is unable to join us on the TikTok live, so to catch David's audio, just make sure you go to our YouTube channel after this. I usually have it up on Fridays. You can also catch us on any of the podcast platforms that you're used to: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, RSS, any of those. So we'll make it super easy for you to catch Dave's audio on there, but right now we're just limited on the TikTok live, so sorry about that. But
I try to make my own pitch, but they can't hear me, so
that's okay. All right, well, we're going to dive into some weekly writing topics. With Quill and Query, we usually do some reading and writing topics, and then a little bit of the publishing and business side as well. But we're going to shake it up a little bit for our first guest episode, dive into some writing topics, and then we're going to get into the interview questions for you guys. But thought we could lead in with some icebreakers. So, Ash, I think these first few topics are actually from you, so I'll let you lead with these.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So first topic of discussion, and once I kind of say the question, you can have at it. So the first one revolves around social media, and my question is: does social media encourage us to read more with the rise of TikTok, particularly book talk, or do we find ourselves more inundated with random content that distracts us and makes our TBRs just too long to be able to handle? And the second part of the question is, how often do you find a creator that you actually like and then end up reading their work?
Okay, great question. Great question. I think there's multifaceted. I think that question is going to be a little different for everyone, right? I went through a period when I was writing my book. I read like 2-3 books a year. At the time, post college, I wasn't doing a ton of reading just for time's sake and whatnot. But since I joined TikTok over a year ago to try and promote my book, I've read in the last 12 months over 16 books, which my goal was just to read 12 in a year, all indie books. So it's definitely promoted my reading time. It is definitely a time drain. It's really easy to get sucked in and just watch videos and stuff. And I make sure I have like a limiter on my phone, so like I'm only on the app for so many hours a day, because otherwise I'll just get dragged into, because I have a little bit of an addictive personality, right? But the amount of reading I've done since joining has just exponentially grown, because I see it as a business opportunity. One, I love how inclusive the book talk, especially the indie book talk community, is, and encouraging and providing feedback and reviewing other people's books. It's one of my favorite things to do, is come on and help other authors in any capacity I can, because we're all in the same boat. We're all trying to do the same thing. And I've found some wonderful books from some indie authors. And at this point, I basically just pick up books based on vibes. If I like the author and their videos, I'll like pick up their book and go into it almost completely blind, and then try and be surprised by it. Which I really enjoy doing. So I think it's definitely been a step up for me, and there's a lot of authors and works out there that I've really come to love because of it.
That's great. What about you, Dave?
Finding that community of individuals that are all on that same kind of path has been the one redeeming quality of the app. And yeah, it's been great to have a list of things to read, and people that are there that you can interact with, that generally want your feedback, and that you have that one-way or two-way interaction then, where it's hey, this is how I felt about it. Oh wow, yeah, that's I was passionate about this part XYZ. It feels much more personable. It encourages me to want to go forward, especially if it's supporting somebody that's also in the indie space. But yeah, like Mick said, you can get you can't get caught up in the oh, I'd like you to look at this work and this work and this work, and then you get inundated, and you do have to be a little bit judicious and figure out what you want to actually focus on. But it's been overall I think pretty positive.
That's great. Brandon, do you have anything to add or a different
No,
opinion?
I think they summed it up pretty well. I'm kind of the same way, where it's really what you make of it. And so, it is very easy to flood your TBR and say yes to everything and become overwhelmed and then get caught up in the doom scrolling as well. But I think if you approach it, like Mick said, as a business opportunity, and you understand that like your time is a commodity, like you have to use it sparingly and make sure you're being productive and kind of lifting up the other authors in the space that you're enjoying. I think that's kind of where I am at too, because originally when I joined Book Talk, I was in that same mindset of like I have to read everybody's book, and I have to fill my TBR with all these indie releases.
Right.
And I found that I was not enjoying reading as much because of that. Not because the books were bad, just because it felt more like I was doing it out of obligation, not out of enjoyment or really actual desire. It just kind of felt like my social peer pressure from TikTok was like, you have to read your friends' books. And so
Right.
I've tried to be more judicious with that and more selective and really pick up the books that, I'm, like Mick said, the vibes are there, and it seems like something that I would pick up at the bookstore just as easily. It's not just because the TikTok peer pressure is pushing me to do it. Some of my favorites that I have picked up from here have been the Seth Campbell's Corrupted Tides.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that series. For me, TikTok has really been like eye-opening because it's shown me all these wonderful indie books that I wouldn't have heard about before. So, and then it's also made me feel super welcome into the community, even not having my book out yet. So like, that's awesome because I don't feel excluded just because my book is a work in progress either. Like, I feel very supported here.
Yeah, there's a balance, and it's tricky to not get swept up in too many requests, right? Especially once you start showing that you only read people's books. Anyone's going to ask, and that's fine. I'm always happy for someone to ask. I encourage people to ask, but I find myself more often being like, not yet. Let me get through these and figure out how to prioritize these. And that's one of the things I do is I look at how many reviews something has, and that kind of adjusts where it is on my priority list. It's like someone who's doing really successful is going to kind of move down the bottom of my priority list, whereas someone who has only a few, I'm like, okay, my one review could potentially boost their numbers and stuff. That's kind of how I try to adjust. But then, of course, there's mood reading and wanting to swap genres or wanting to swap book lengths and stuff as you go, which are, of course, factors. And like, I'll download any book that's free, like stuff you can Kindle. So I've got like 90 ebooks, but I also love whenever someone sends me a book, that also increases the priority because someone has taken their time and money to get that to me, right? But then I love when someone has sent me a book and I'm like, wow, I love this. Then going and trying to get a signed copy or get an edition of it in another format, even if it's not the format I prefer, because that is a way for me to spread the joy that I feel whenever someone reads my book and is like, ooh, let me pay for this, please.
What about you, Ash? How has your entire Book Talk experience been?
I think I'm in the middle. I think you all are very much, we all agree. I tend to get too distracted, and recently I was telling Brandon, I think a few weeks ago too, like I also put a limit on my phone in terms of the apps that I'm using. Only because I do end up after a really long day, like today, all you want to do is just decompress, and after staring at a screen, writing or reading something digital can just be really hard and overwhelming. And I also see so many good books that I'm just interested in. So my TBR does get very long, but I like how you, Mick, were saying about adjusting to like what book doesn't have as many reviews as the other, and then the physical, like it, adjusting where you need it. I also just don't think there are enough hours in the day for me. By the time the day is over, I'm like, oh my god, I had 17 other things I needed to do today. So a bit of both. I think I tend to get sucked in a little too easily, so I'm working on not doing that. But again, Book Talk has been, on my end of things, a very great experience in terms of like, uplifting local authors and indie authors and making a podcast like this and getting involved in the anthology. Like, none of these things I would have done without it. So there are definitely extremely great things about TikTok in general, and Instagram as well, but mostly TikTok.
Another thing I totally forgot to mention about my experience too was the like accountability that comes with having a social media presence as far as like my reading and writing goes is huge. Yeah. Because I definitely read way more than I did prior to joining. I definitely write way more because there's just that kind of good pressure, right? Like people are happy when you make progress. It's not a toxic thing where they're like harassing you if you didn't read or write enough, but it's to the point where like they get excited when you share a writing update and things like that. So doing that has kind of given me more drive to finish my stories and also to read more, to like share in the experiences that people are having with all of these indie books and then some, traditionally published books as well. All right. Well, we have another topic from Ash, so I'm going to let her go ahead.
Yeah, the end of your spiel right then leads really well into this topic. Also, apologies, it has been a truly like genuinely long day, so if I stumble over my words, forgive me.
I'm doing it too.
So the second topic is reading outside of your genre, and I'm curious how frequently you guys read outside of your preferred genre, if you have one, and if so, let us know what that is. Do you think it's important to do that, or is it more important for you to read in your genre because you're writing in that genre? So I'm curious about that.
That is a good question. Wow, yeah, I guess. Yeah, if you only get to pick one place to kind of hang your hat as like your genre, then yeah, you'd be hard pressed. Like, oh, I only read, urban if you could, just like music, right? You could break it down and to be super reductive about it, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I like to try to be broad about it. I would say fantasy, which is what we're writing, and is not my natural genre anyway. It's really probably more science fiction. So I like to bounce between science fiction and fantasy to kind of try to keep it fresh. Now, if someone offered me as a challenge or something to say, hey, I'd really like you to read this mystery or this something else, I guess I'd relish that just to kind of see, because I hadn't really thought about it until you had said that, I guess, to see like, wow, yeah, I guess you do kind of get stovepiped a little bit sometimes when there is a lot out there. There's a lot of fantasy, like we just talked about. There's a lot of stuff on Book Talk, different flavors of some of the same stuff. But there's a whole lot out there that's not just Book Talk stuff either. And there's definitely genres super underrepresented, at least in the circles that we run in on Book Talk also. So I guess, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, yeah, I don't deliberately go out of my way to read other stuff. Like I said, if it's science fiction, fantasy, or research for the other things, something personal, current events, whatever. Yeah, but yeah, no, I haven't been going through Barnes and Noble or something recently and be like, wow, that's a really interesting, I don't know, musical history, but I'm gonna read that. Like, it'd be fascinating to try, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you kind of the same?
I primarily read fantasy and sci-fi, but here's the thing: fantasy is such a broad spectrum, and one of the reasons we describe Paragon Exordium a lot of times as genre bending, because it doesn't fit into just one kind of category because of the way the story is told, the scope of the story. It's a fantasy story set in our world, but it's not urban fantasy, even though it's like there isn't a category for it. This book is on Amazon, really, which is an epic rural fantasy, right? So there's so many different things you can learn from things outside of my normal genre. Like I've read some thriller stuff, and we try and incorporate thriller elements into the story. Fantasy is so broad and varied that you can incorporate any other genre into it and utilize things from that to enhance your fantasy. So I like getting things that are a little outside of my normal purview. And like, for example, I don't read a lot of romantasy or romantic fantasy, right? But The Song of Thesia by my friend S.J. Styles is one of my favorite reads of the last year, and it's a romantasy. So I do like to try and poke the edges of what I read in my fantasy and my sci-fi and try different things within that genre. I'm perfectly willing to go outside that drama, but there's so much within that that genre itself that I can work with and incorporate and learn from. That's really where I try and focus on.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast, but it hasn't been until the last few years when I created a book club with my friends that I really started going outside the genre, which is fantasy for me. Again, understanding that fantasy is a very broad umbrella. But yeah, I think it's been really great because it has encouraged me to read more outside of my genre in order to hone my skill in writing a bit. I think it can be really easy, especially when you have like your favorite authors that kind of stay in this subgenre of fantasy.
Right.
It's your comfort, it's something you love, and it's really hard to step away from. But I've found a lot of good benefit from, like you said, like the romantasy. You know, sometimes you just need a good romantasy or a good history book or something, whatever, to just shake it up. But yeah, I think Brandon is kind of similar. You've been reading some non-fantasy stuff recently in the last year, right?
Yeah, I read a wide variety of genres, to be honest. I'll read fantasy, I'll read sci-fi, I'll read a bunch of nonfiction. I love nonfiction. Historical fiction is also one of my favorites. But like Mick said, fantasy is such a wide encompassing genre that I feel like you can get pretty much whatever you want in the fantasy genre itself. Like there's romantasy, there's fantasy that leans more into the horror, there's like comedic fantasy. There's so many different subgenres of fantasy that I feel like other genres don't have that same extent of like niches. So
Yeah.
but I do like to shake it up. I'm very much a mood reader, like we've talked about. So it really just depends on what I'm in the mood for. Megan says detective fantasy, rom-com, ocean punk fantasy. That's a new one.
Ocean punk, never heard of that.
I'm pretty sure Seth invented that. No, yeah, ocean punk fantasy is one of the new faves. But yeah, like I said, I'm a big mood reader. I'll read just about anything if it sounds interesting. And I was actually going to get into this a little later, but sometimes I'll read books that I'm not particularly interested in based on, like, if they have a very negative reception. One of the best pieces of writing advice I got was to read bad books. So I do that sometimes, and I force myself to kind of get through those just because they have a lot of valuable lessons to offer you as a writer, I think. And then they teach me a lot.
Favorite. There's someone's favorite. I mean, one person out there, it's like probably their favorite book too. So that's always something to think about as well.
Yeah, and there's the matter that art is subjective to to a degree, and then it kind of reinforces for me like what I like in stories and what I don't like, so I can take that into my writing and be like, okay, I'm really sure that I don't like this and I don't want to do this, so I have that example of don't do it this way
right
in my head as I'm approaching my draft. So that's always super helpful. And sometimes they're pretty like entertaining, like when something's so bad it's like it's good. Like sometimes they can be like that.
That's so difficult to hit the nail on the head with between mediums. Like it's so easy to get a movie that's so bad it's good. It's so much harder to do that with books because you don't have the actors to fall back on. Because the movies that are so bad they're good have the talent of the actors to which to rely on. So if a book is so bad it's good, that falls so much within your own imagination to make that work.
It does. Yeah. Point. It's all about perspective.
It absolutely is. Yeah.
It is. It truly is. Brandon, I'm thinking, do we want to do one more topic for this of your choice and then move on to the questions for the authors?
Yeah, I think that'll be good. We put maybe a few too many topics in here, so I wasn't sure how long this was going to be. So yeah, we'll do about one more. I'll kind of follow the train of thought I just touched on and go to the third topic I have here, which is about the best and worst writing advice you've ever received. So I want to hear, one, the best piece of writing advice you've ever received, and two, the worst, and then how both have impacted your writing.
That's tough. It shouldn't be tough, but that is tough.
I'll go first.
Okay, yeah, please. I'm curious now. I want to hear what you have to say.
So I think the worst advice is a famous piece of advice, but I will say anytime I go back and read what I write, I'm like, no way. Is the write drunk, edit sober kind of phrase. I got told that a lot, obviously, because it's a very famous. Who was it? Oh, was it Fitzgerald who said it? I can't remember who said it, but write drunk, edit sober. I think that's like the worst piece of advice ever.
Sounds like a Hemingway thing, maybe. I don't know.
It might have been Hemingway. It might have been. So I think that is my worst. And my best advice that I've received from somebody else is don't edit while you write. Like, which is almost impossible for me to do, but it is something that I try and maintain in my head of just like get it on paper and you can edit later, but you can't edit something that's not written. So those are my two.
Okay. So maybe something common that people say that I did not find useful at all, which is, and this is, I understand it's in the vein of like trying to get you to write when you have writer's block or just to get people writing. And it's, which and to that point it works, but I don't think it works for me is, well, if you don't know what to write, just start writing. Like, well,
gotcha.
I've tried that a bunch and then, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't end up working out for me because I can't focus myself on something that's really valuable without any direction. It doesn't, with no goal, right? I haven't ever seen that one work out. Just like, oh, just write about anything. And then I'm like, well, okay, I see this object, I see this. It never leads me to a breakthrough. I don't get inspiration that way. I get inspiration from other things, not from just beginning and then letting it flow. Maybe it works for other people, but it doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Let's see. Best writing advice versus worst writing advice. I mean, I think this isn't going to be super controversial. No, we'll go with the best. One of the best pieces of writing. Shut up. One of the best pieces of writing advice that I like to share with people is I forget where I heard it, but someone was like, if you're having writer's block in a scene, change the weather. Because when you change the weather, you have to change everything about the scene and the context of the scene, and it forces your brain to refire in a different way. And it's been super helpful. And one of the things I'll also do is, since I'm writing multiple POVs, if I get stuck on one, I'll just change to different characters' POV. But if I'm really stuck, shifting the weather really helps because you have to change literally everything about the scene, from lighting to smells to environment to how the character is behaving or talking. It just completely rewires the brain a little bit, and that may not work for everyone, but I want to try and share that tidbit with as many people as possible.
That's a really good. That's It's in the same vein of the one that I've heard. It's like if you're stuck on a scene, write it from the perspective of a cat or a dog to kind of like get those. But it's very similar. Like, yeah, just change one major thing about the scenario. That's really, I like that a lot.
And as far as worst writing advice is, I mean, I have very strong opinions about books that are designed to teach writing, because usually that's the only book the person teaching the writing has written. And you get advice like, don't use the word said, or only use said, which is just nonsense. It's a nonsense piece of advice. You want to have balance in as many things as possible, but there's so much that can be used with words like whispered. Like he said no. That is up to, like, they said, like, the advice that everyone should be able to infer the tone of how something is said based on the words said. He said no is drastically changed by he whispered no, or he shouted no. Yeah. You can add a period. You can have he said no, and then you can change it to he whispered no with an exclamation point, and that's vastly different. A punctuation and descriptive words, as long as you're not abusing them and being distracted, I think it's really bad advice for a lot of people. I think it's very discouraging. And anytime you see someone whose entire thing is writing advice, if they haven't actually written anything, you're probably fine to move on from their advice.
The people that wrote something very important already wrote the how-to. You just read it, right? Yep. I mean, you don't have to write, like,
exactly.
Your work stands for itself in that case. You don't have to write another one, and mixed right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I complained about this in a Discord server recently about authors whose only like body of work is how-to books, but they don't have any like successful examples of their advice in practice.
Sounds like an Amazon dropshipping scam or something, right?
No, truly, Amazon dropshipping, 100%.
And Mick already touched on what I was going to say was the worst piece of advice I ever got was the only use said, don't use any other dialogue tags. As soon as I saw that advice, the first thing I did is I walked over to my bookshelf and I picked up two of my favorite books. I picked up A Game of Thrones and The Blade itself. And within the first 5 pages, I saw like growled, sneered. Right. Like I was like, yeah, okay, well, clearly these people aren't following that advice.
Somebody said that in the 90s and it got like stuck in a bunch of people's heads and like they haven't been able to get rid of it because it comes back like once a year as like a controversial subject. It's so bizarre.
Somebody's high school English teacher failed them.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good, yeah. I got a D in English, so here's my writing advice.
I think that's just the emergency engagement button.
Right.
Yeah,
social
that's
media.
true. Yeah, just what is it? What do they call it? Rage bait.
Rage bait.
Yeah.
Complete rage bait. Yeah.
Yeah, all press is good press.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, we can move into our author interview questions here. We got a good set of questions to ask you guys. So, Ash, I think this first question is actually yours. So I'm going to go ahead and let you pose this question
Yeah.
to Mick and David.
It's a pretty generic intro interview question, but I wanted to hear from your words, not just the blurb on your novel, but give us the overview of your work and any, if any, writing experience you both had previously.
Okay, overview of our work. So, Paragon Exordium is an epic rural fantasy that is genre bending and about the indomitable human spirit. It is about a magical apocalypse wherein our sky is shattered by the magic return of the Fae, and humanity is brought to the brink of extinction. And the type of person you have to be to survive in that world, and the responsibilities that come with power in that world, and the effects of power on the individual based on what type of person they are. It is a long book. It's over 700 pages, over 231,000 words, but it is easy to read, which was a focus of ours. It doesn't sacrifice quality for that. It is written for adults, but we wanted it to be accessible to multiple ages. We wanted it to be like Lord of the Rings or the Chronicles of Narnia, which are read to me growing up. And while it does deal with some heavy themes, there's no spice, there's no foul language to try and create a balance. But we don't sacrifice the darkness that is in the setting for that. And some people have said it's borderline grimdark. So it's about things like that. It's for fantasy lovers, but it's also for newcomers to the fantasy genre as an introductory fantasy world. We try and put a spin on all the tropes. When we were writing it, we never considered tropes unless we were saying, how can we subvert these tropes? Tropes was a dirty word in our writing process because we wanted to always look at it at how can we make this fresh and unique and new and not the same thing you've seen while still paying homage to the things we love about fantasy.
I love that. That was so succinct and fantastically said.
Thank you.
That's great. Do you have anything to add, David? Yeah.
Oh my God! It's almost like he's polished this over years of. Hard to follow, right? No, I mean ultimately it's a survival story cast against the backdrop of the magical end of the world, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's a human story, right? It gets into all the unique things that make people tick when they're pushed to the absolute limit, and that story is only going to get bigger as this all expands, and Exordium is, like the title says, just the beginning of how people learn to live with each other and the rest of the world all over again. So
great.
Yeah, I think not to hijack your pitch there, Mick, but I think recently I heard you pitch it in, maybe it was a TikTok video or something else, as like Red Dawn meets Lord of the Rings, and I thought that was a really interesting mashup there. That was
so that is the original inspiration for it. I was in high school, and my dad showed me the movie Red Dawn while I was reading Lord of the Rings, and I had a dream that was basically Red Dawn, Lord of the Rings. Like, what if our world was overrun by these fantasy beings and stuff? And so that is very much the original inspiration for the concept. It has drastically evolved over the decades since then, but that is or Reign of Fire, if you've seen that. Like, that's also kind of Red Dawn-esque, where dragons like overrun the world, but just include every other magical being, and you've got it. That's the book.
That is awesome. That's so cool. Well, did you guys have any previous writing experience, like whether it be short stories or just like, did you go to school for it, or was this just truly like a first-time passion project that you 100% made happen?
I wrote 2 short stories in like 8th grade about a guy named Detective Alex. one of which got entered into a film festival or a short film in high school that we did that is just awful and somewhere on YouTube, and hopefully no one ever finds it because it's absolutely dreadful. I also wrote a retelling of, I don't know if Dave even knows this, I rewrote the Greek legend of Persephone and Hades in high school and turned it into a romantasy before that's like a webcomic
Before
now.
that was a thing?
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
I copyrighted my retelling of the story like when I was like 13. So like I have it in an envelope somewhere. I'm sure it's terrible. I don't want to ever look at it, but it's a very popular thing now. But other than that, this is the first attempt at actually writing a book that we've done. I have written a second book since then, but we don't talk about that one. Dave?
Okay.
You should. You should talk about it because it's a fascinating
Apparently you
story
should.
for meta reasons and otherwise. No, this was my first foray as well. We've been at it a minute, so I haven't really had time for other forays. This was college until now, so I hate to keep thinking about what that date means to me, but this was it. So
a true like passion project between you both. That is awesome. It's very cool.
It looks like Megan is going to be on the hunt for that short film,
Yeah.
Mick, and Atlas says...
you shouldn't have said that. I don't know why you...
No, they're not going to find it. They're not going to find it, I hope.
And Atlas says, you just liked how Matthew McConaughey looked in that movie, so...
I like Christian Bale better than Matthew McConaughey. Sorry, Atlas.
McConaughey?
McConaughey. He was a crazy American, though, and there definitely wasn't any inspiration for my book with crazy Americans.
If I had to take a Matthew McConaughey reference for inspiration for this book, it'd be True Detective. But
Ooh, nice.
it's all Southern
He is
Gothic
great in
and
that
mystery
one.
stuff, man. It fits
Fair.
right in.
Yeah, that's funny. All right.
Ash, I probably should have asked you this question before, but the way we wrote our questions in the doc is all your questions and then all mine. Did you want to read them that way, or did you want to alternate, or how did you want to do that?
That is completely up to you. Okay, let's see. We can go question for question, and then we'll see where that leaves us if you want to do that.
Okay, so like I read the next question.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
You can read one of your questions if you'd like, or we can.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. Let me just scroll down to my first one here. I'm missing the line of where mine began.
We can
All
also keep, whatever works.
You can ask us a question and look for your next question while we answer the question if you want.
I'm trying to be cognizant that I can't be seen or heard on TikTok with my answers, but I'm not doing a very good job, so
That's okay.
That's okay.
can't help y'all.
All right. Ash, I'll just go right ahead with question to inspiration.
Cool.
So, Mick, David, we wanted to know what inspired you to write Paragon Exordium. I know we talked a little bit about that already, but if there's anything more to dive into there, feel free. And then did you pull from any authors you read growing up? And
Sure.
did you feel like there was a gap in the market for your book that you wanted to fill?
It sounds like it from what I've heard so far.
So
Sounds
gap in the
where-
market is a phenomenal, fascinating question because I didn't care if there was a gap in the market or not. I had a book in my head that once I graduated college, I had 2 years before my wife was done. I didn't have any debt because I worked my fingers to the bone in college and had scholarships and stuff, and I paid for it all myself. So I had some time that I was like, I'm gonna take 2 years and write this book that I've had in my head for a decade, and just to see if I can. So the market was irrelevant because I was writing something that I wanted to write and that I knew I wanted to read. It was basically the idea that I've always wanted to have out in the world, so it didn't matter what the market was to me because it's my story. I wanted to tell it, and I knew I liked it, so surely some other people would probably enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
So that's that. I lost the other part of the question. It escaped me. Go, Dave.
I got that part. Don't worry. Yeah, I got recruited. That's how I got inspired. Nick recruited me to help. He's like, hey, I need someone who I was an English literature major at the time. And he was like, hey, I need a person who does English stuff to look at this to see what's going on. And then it evolved into editing more of it full time, and then adding things to it. And then it became this, symbiotic mostly relationship and getting everything taken care of. So I got recruited. It wasn't my work originally. I just was very passionate about it. And I tell him all the time that if I wasn't, I wouldn't have done this and wouldn't, spent all this time doing all this in the first place. At the time when we started writing, I was still in school, so all the inspiration was like this highfalutin college stuff you're supposed to read, right? The things you get sent to you and whatever. But to Brandon's point, that was, the show Game of Thrones was coming out. So at the beginning, we were watching and then reading Game of Thrones as they were being published. So that was a big one for me. And I also, later on, I read other things that I think were helpful and inspire things. I do like Joe Abercrombie. I think that was great. At the beginning, I just got kind of roped in, and that was just kind of how it went from there. And marketing or what it could be, a lot of things that mixed at the beginning, right? About like, oh, it bends this, it bends that. Like, it just happened that way. It wasn't planned as like, oh, this has some grimdark, or oh, this sounds like it was. We just wrote it, and then it ended up being like other people besides us would be like, hey, that sounds kind of like this, and then we incorporate it into the pitch because we didn't intend it to be that way.
I mean, and that's an interesting thing about the origin of stuff with all this, is because it's my original brain baby that Dave has helped raise, very much co-parenting with me, and but Dave made me read Joe Abercrombie's series as we were writing and editing this, and we read it together and we studied it to try and learn lessons from it. So I think Joe Abercrombie's books were definitely an impact and definitely an inspiration. Also, like for me, of course, Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia growing up, those are classic fantasy ones. If you want some less known ones, Artemis Fowl was a big influence of mine. It's a very similar fantasy world, our world overlap, right? Ours is just more adult and more apocalyptic in a sense, but that's one of my major influences.
There's a lot of Logan and Peter.
There's a lot of Logan, Nine Fingers, and Peter. That's fair.
So talk a little bit more then in the regards, you guys mentioned that, you guys shared a similar love of certain things, but how did that end up bleeding into working together? What were the challenges, if any, of kind of reading similar stuff and then trying to make it happen in the novel? How do you guys work together in that regard?
So Dave mentioned I brought him on because he was an English major. That's not the only factor. One of the other major factors in bringing him on was similar experiences in college. We were good friends, but also he was a military guy. He was in the Army. And so one of the main focuses, one of the main perspectives in Paragon Exordium is that of a soldier, because I was so tired at the point where I started this of the farm boy finds magic sword and slays all his enemies trope. I was like, in a situation like this, that guy makes it 5 minutes before he's just run down. And I wanted to make sure my character was grounded in someone who could believably survive and thrive and be useful in this setting. So the main character is a military guy. And so I wanted to make sure that component of the story, because it's such a heavy component of the story, didn't make anyone with military experience cringe. And so I brought Dave in so he could have the jargon and the dialogue and the choices and all that be grounded for that character and be consistent for that character, and to be a thing that was appealing to people of that audience. So those were major factors. As far as challenges and stuff, the biggest challenge has just been Dave has moved so much over the years as being in the military. He's lived in 8 different countries over the past decade, something like that. And so just working with time together to work on stuff. But as we've worked on this story, he's gone from just an editor who was just like giving me some feedback. His role has been so instrumental, and because our conversations have evolved to a point where we've just met almost every weekend for the past 8 years, that for book 2, it made no sense to simply qualify him as an editor, because he's had such an impact on the overall story that he was basically promoted to co-author.
Gotcha.
Man loves a promotion.
So what about you, Dave? What was the experience of working together and being, the editor, but now co-author of Paragon Exordium like for you?
Yeah, cool. So the original iterations, it was pretty straightforward. Hey, I need help. I need perspective. I need this. I covered it in my very few forays into TikTok individual videos that I've kind of put out. Right. I was in college. I was a cadet. Military experience may vary, but obviously not some kind of grizzled veteran individual, right? It was the series was being released onto Patreon as like a weekly, or I think might have been monthly kind of installments, chapter by chapter, and it kept everything. Hey, we have a week, or a month, whatever length of time we had for that one. Hey, let's get this done in installments, kind of like how stories used to come out to the American public through newspapers or periodicals, very similar. And so we kind of got on a very good schedule. And as I'm editing it, obviously I have questions about why he made these choices or what this was going on. And the longer those conversations got, the more it was like, oh, well, what about this thing or this thing, or, and started to get really dive into the aspects of the story beyond what is grammatically or thematically correct, but is, hey, I have ideas about what might make this world different, or the story, I don't, it'd be hard to put a pin in where exactly it went from, I'm just editing it, to where we're just having conversations either early in the morning or late at night, depending on what hemisphere I was in at the time. But at some point it turned over to us, debating, dwarven theology. And I was like looking back over my shoulder being like, wait a minute, I was supposed to just make sure the periods were in the right place.
Yeah. So just truly a natural progression of just involvement.
Yeah, I felt natural progression. And it was, like I said, with the timetables, it was very grounding, right? I had a lot of movement, a lot of stuff going on in my life. Obviously, I'm moving. So, yeah, it's been the one regular thing, and it's kept everything, on pace. Maybe not as fast as we wanted sometimes due to that, including right now. But, yeah, it's kept us going this whole time that way. I mean, and as far as, working together, not just how I got into it, I know, we just share everything, right? We've got one document now. We make edits to both of it. We can see what each other's editing. And now it's like sort of getting into a hive mind status where, we're sort of, most things it's, I'll go in and tweak something or he'll tweak something, and that's kind of it. The discussion's basically over. There's only really major points now where, we have contention, or, hey, we're going to really go back and we're not happy with this part or this character, and go in and deliberately make, the big things are what's going to get us, the small. We're not really sweating the small stuff as much. I think we're both attuned now. And some people claim that they can tell who wrote what, like I think our wives. But other than that, we'll see what people say when we get through the second one. So.
It's funny how the degree, if I can tangent for just a second here, the degree to which we're in tune was tested during book 2, where we both had a chapter where, like, okay, let's go in and edit this independently. And we both edited a section of like 4 pages. And then we presented to each other our edits, and they were virtually identical. We had characters doing virtually the same thing. The word choices were slightly altered, but the actions and the movements and the things said by the characters were so similar that it was almost indecipherable who wrote what. And we just picked out the pieces that, like, okay, I like your word choice here. You like my word choice here. We'll just modify it until it is. So it's to a degree, to my level of trust for Dave is sometimes I don't even go in depth. He's like, hey, I added this. I'm like, I don't know where you added anything, because it all just flows so succinctly. Yeah. And it makes our story so unique. And in my opinion, so much better, because this is a series of 2 minds, not just one.
That's so cool. You just don't hear about that very often. I mean, you hear about ghostwriters who are able to like write in the voice of the author, but you very rarely hear about 2 people coming together and just like over time kind of becoming one and the same voice and with the same goals. That's really cool to hear.
I think we trauma bonded.
Yeah, trauma bonding will do that too, I'm sure.
There you go.
Well, I think we touched a little bit on these next 2 questions. So, Ash, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump actually a little bit forward to the publishing question we have. So, Paragon Exordium, correct me if I'm wrong, but is self-published. So, walk us through that process of publishing, once the book was done, and what that looked like for you guys, and how you decided what platform to publish on, whether it was Ingram, KDP, or whatever, and then any specific goals that you might have set for like sales, reviews, any of those things?
Yeah, so that's where the trauma bonding comes in, is the publishing process, right? So when we finished, of course, we're like, okay, we got our book done. We're not going to do like the full, we'd done 7 edits at that point. I think it took us about 6-7 years. We did 7 runs through 7 drafts, and we're like, okay, well, how do we publish a book? Well, we submit to publishers and stuff. And so I did my research, and I spent a year in the query trenches, and I submitted over 100 queries. It was all I was doing almost during that time. I was doing hardly any writing during it. I was doing some, but we submitted to over 100. and I'm still getting rejections. We've been published for a year. I'm still getting rejection letters because it takes so long. But there was such a consistent theme of people saying, hey, look, this isn't what's the market right now, or this is too long for us of a book for a new time author in this category. It's just not worth the risk. Let us know if you want to chop it up or something. But it was just so much of a consistent, hey, this is good, it's just not for us thing. That after a year, like, we just want to get this into people's hands because all the Patreons that supported us for all this time loved it. Everyone we give it to loves it. People who we know are harsh critics and even strangers we're sending it to are loving it. We know the value of what we have here. It's just a huge risk for a publisher to take on, with the market being what it is, with the length of it being what it is, with us being co-authors, because that's not appealing to any publisher, and just so many factors working against us. And, you know, also, like, abandoning the teenage boys is not a market that publishers want to explore or reach out to. And this is a book that I think isn't written for them, but many of them will enjoy. And so there were just so many factors that culminated in us going, like, you know what, let's just get it out there. And if eventually a publisher sees the value for it and sees it for what it is, we'll consider giving it to them. But also, this gives us the creative freedom to make sure the story stays how we want it to, and not have outside influences beyond the ones we brought in that we trust ourselves, right? And so we ended up going with Ingram Spark because my brother had published 2 books, which were just a series of essays he wrote. And so Ingram Spark's what we went with because I read some stuff about KDP, and I was like, it's not, I don't like the exclusivity of that. Ingram Spark gets us worldwide. I can build it up. There was like a one-time fee at the beginning, and then that was before you had to edit per edition. I don't have to edit any editions. I don't have to pay for edits of these editions because I paid one fee up front. So that's what we went with. I think that answers the question. Did I miss anything?
No,
goals.
I think that was pretty. Yeah.
Yeah, goals. We wanted to hit 50 reviews on the Zon by our first year, and we missed that goal by like a month. We were right there at the edge, and that was great. Every goal we set, we hit. The only real goal we have left, I have 2 goals right now, which is to get to 500 copies sold before the end of the year. We're about 25, 28 away. We're very close. Getting an audiobook set up and getting an audiobook done was one of our goals, which we got done. It took longer than expected, but we got there. I've been blown away by our success in that we're at almost 500 copies of this book out there purely by word of mouth. We've done and paid for no advertising. This has just been us being like, hey, check out our book, and sharing it with people, and people reviewing it and sharing it with one another. I have a lot of faith in where this will go. The ultimate goal is to break even, right? And you would think 500 copies, they're close. No. we editing a book this size is expensive because we did actually end up hiring a professional editor once we decided to self-publish. But also, we hired a very, very talented artist for the cover who has experience doing like Magic the Gathering cards and has actually won a Tolkien Society award, hoping that maybe some of that notoriety would translate into book sales, which it didn't necessarily do. But I love our cover. I think it's gorgeous, and it was well worth it. But that was a major expense in an area where we've learned, like, maybe we can get another artist who's as talented for not necessarily the same price that will help us cut down our overall expenses.
Ooh.
Do you have anything to add?
Sorry.
No, Mick's right. I had basically no expectations except for let's see how many people want to see this. You know, we were confident in the story we had, and it was, I wouldn't say I was despondent, but, every day hearing from Mick saying, they said no again, or they said no again. But he's not wrong in saying a lot of the professionals were like, hey, this isn't our thing, or hey, if you chop this up into 3 parts, we'll talk, or hey, maybe they're just being professional. Maybe they're, we had very few just no's. It was always a qualifier. And to that, I have that kind of, so you're saying there's a chance kind of in the back of my head of like, it wasn't
encouraging.
This isn't for us. It was, It was, hey, someone will take this, or hey, we can't because it's so long. Or there was always something, and it wasn't, your story's garbage, you should stop. Like, so man,
Right.
if someone would have come out and really just said we're not there, maybe that would have been a different story. Yeah, it's disheartening to have, a bunch of industry professionals, tell you no, of course. I mean, I can't say that was a happy feeling, but so far so good, despite the sweat and the tears. A lot of people have seen it, like we've talked about, right? Finding the kind of book talk TikTok community really helped, getting it off the ground to like the intermediate level past people that we just sort of know. Going through Ingram Smart has been interesting, not to just, I'm not in love with certain policies, but there's no way to do this that is going to be satisfactory, I think, for anybody, right? I don't like the costs associated with printing as is, because that's a barrier to people reading it. But then, there's other, right? Everything has a cost. Everything has its own issues, right? And we could have vanity published it for $1 million, right? I mean, there's other ways that this could have gone down. And to Mick's point about goals, right? Yeah, this went way past any amount that I ever thought. And the other mediums getting it out there, like the audiobook. I mean, just being able to hear it back to me from someone that wasn't us, in the way that he was able to bring that out. That was to me was kind of it. I was just listening. I'm on Audible, and it's like, Paragon Exordium. I'm like, wow, like this is it got this. Wow, that was to me. I was like, well, okay, I think I'd be good. Not that I'm satisfied, but I'd be good, at that point.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's so, yeah, I mean, that's got to be crazy to, like, have somebody professionally read something that you have written.
Yeah, you did a fantastic job.
Yeah, that's so, it's just not even something that I even consider, because you just hear audiobooks now are such, like, a big, kind of, like, really big thing now.
Got a lot of people with the audiobook.
Yeah, and then you just don't, for small indie and self-published authors, you don't realize, at least I haven't realized until recently and just now, that, that's like a huge thing for you guys and for anybody to just hear somebody telling your story.
Yeah.
And you're not just staring at it on a screen that you have read over and over
Feels
and over
weird.
1,000. Yeah, that's so cool, though. That's so exciting. I wanted to follow up. I know we were talking about goals, but I'm so fascinated to hear how the process with Patreon was. You said you released it weekly or monthly. Talk us through that process and how you first decided that was a choice you wanted to make, and how it felt throughout its history.
So that was early on in the writing process. It was after I wrote the first act, which I wrote by hand as a challenge to myself to try and just, I have it. So that's a side change. I won't get into that. So I was doing a lot of work, and I was working a job. I was like, the amount of time and effort I'm sinking into this, where I am financially, I need a little income, but I also need something that's going to keep me on a schedule. So I created a Patreon, and I just coerced, we'll say, my friends and family into supporting it. I was like, hey, look, here's some different tiers. I will write I'll write a bonus chapter every other month for a certain tier, and that bonus chapter will be based on you and how you would operate in this world, or what, like a little short story about you in this environment, or you'll get a chance to have one of the characters named after you, or if we get officially published, you'll get one of the publishing copies that I'm given at the beginning if you support us for these different tiers and stuff. So basically, it was set to a chapter a month was our goal, and we were paid per chapter that was released. At our height, I think we had 60 subscribers, and overall, we made about $6,000 over a year of writing and releasing chapters like that. And it was really good in a couple different ways. It helped pay for my wedding, just because of the timing of it. But it was a learning experience in what kind of worked for people, what drew people in, because it was always interesting to try and look at the metrics of who was actually supporting it just to support because they're friends or family, and who was actually reading it. And we got a lot of really great feedback that way early on. And the book has transformed since that initial publishing. It was basically like having paid alpha readers along the process. But it encouraged us to make sure our first draft had a level of professionalism and a level of editing that we felt we're not putting out any chapter until we feel like it is professional enough for someone else to read. And so that saw a lot of rewriting in chapters and stuff. And then we, of course, looked at everything. We went back and got a professional edits and all that. and we had a really good, tight framework to work with based on that.
Yeah, I don't want to bury the lead on any sort of marketing or, advice for the future questions that are probably coming, right? But that was actually really key for the beginning, was the feedback, not just the pat on the back, here's some money. Like, the feedback was super important. The people that were, wow, this is, we're friends, but like, okay, like I want to get into this. And then it was like a little challenge sometimes too, right? It'd be like, hey, this person gave us more money. Oh dang, now we got to get our friend into this weird situation in this story. And it was like creative writing, a little bit extra money, and we were accountable to somebody, people that were going to pay us for a little bit. Wow. And it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was enough to be, there's some stake in this. And that was really important to get it out to people, and to get it to people that were willing to come back. And some of those same people now are still really heavily invested and still, still into it, still wanting to provide feedback. And
some of those people didn't read it until the audiobook. Patreons for like 2 years, and they didn't. Like, one of them was my buddy Alex, who he's like, I couldn't bring myself to read it, but then he tore through the audiobook in like 2 weeks and was like, this is amazing, I can't believe I've been supporting this for so long, and it took me so long to get to it. So it's a very unique and was a very encouraging experience, and it's not something we're doing now for a number of reasons. Mostly like spoilery ones, but also time constraints and whatnot like that. But it is something I would consider in the future for other series and stuff.
And last thing before I don't want to derail everybody else, a lot of the way that I've seen Patreons for like authors go, and I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of the times you're paying for access, and we have our Discord set up with a bunch of people in it, and no one's paying for access. Right, that's a space for people to come in and talk, discuss the book and discuss their books and have a laugh every once in a while. That's not locked behind like, well, you got to pay us $5. You can't come in here.
Sure.
Like, I get the financial reason why people would do that, but like, it's not that big, and it's better for us to have that around, that group of people that are passionate about it around, instead of making them pay for the privilege. So.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Fair. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I think we touched on this as like just a general topic weeks and weeks ago, Brandon, about like the growth of authors having Patreons or having limited access kind of content. So it's really cool that you guys are our first kind of interview to say that it can be done, and
for sure.
it incentivizes readers. So that's really neat.
Yeah, I was actually going to say the same thing, where like I've never gotten actual like data and metrics from someone on how successful a Patreon has been for them. So it sounds like it worked out pretty well for you guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's super interesting, because it makes me more inclined to like consider stuff like that in the future. Whereas before I was like, there's no market for this. Nobody wants this, but
yeah.
I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to another question asked, since I think we touched on reception and marketing a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the lessons learned from the whole process of writing Paragon Exordium, and what kind of I guess insights you are taking into book 2. Like what were the highs and lows of the project, and then I'm guessing the answer is yes based on what we talked about, but
David's like, oh my god.
Do you feel like it's helped you grow as a writer, and David as an editor / writer?
Highs and lows. Wow.
Thought-provoking question.
It is because there's a lot of different elements to it. It can be
right.
So it's so addictive, getting people to read it and getting people to respond to it and engage with it. And we've learned a ton, right? We've modified our writing style. We've modified our process. We've gone into book 2. Book 2 is going so much faster than book 1 did, just because we've enhanced our process and how we work together and how we tackle it and the perspectives of it. And as Dave said in an interview one time, and I keep quoting him on this, we are no longer building the car underneath us as we're driving. We have the car, we have the vehicle. Now we're just waxing it between stops. just filling it up with a little bit extra gas along the way. So as far as lows, the lows are just my own addictive personality checking my Ingram Spark and Audible sales every day, multiple times a day, to a degree that's probably unhealthy. It is an obsession that I'm trying to wean myself off of and take a step back. And just there's a constant fear that if I'm not talking about my book on here, no one's going to read it. No one's going to know about it. So that can be detrimental. I've had to take steps back on how much content I'm producing on TikTok, which is just intrinsically tied to a fear that if I'm not there constantly, goes away and people forget about it, which isn't going to happen because we have such a dedicated following at this point and people are interested in it. But it's such a tricky area to find balance with. And like the highs are every time someone who is an author I admire or respect is like, hey, I've started your book. And luckily so far none of them have hated it, or at least they haven't told me they've hated it, so I haven't quite experienced that low yet. But I'm waiting for like my first 1-star, my first 2-star review. I'm looking forward to it as in a way a badge of honor of the next level of success is I've reached beyond the people who are going to enjoy it and gotten someone who is outside of that target to engage with it, and they didn't like it. And when we hit that, will that be a low that will stick in my brain for weeks at a time? Yes, but it will also be an achievement and a high in its own way.
That is such a really awesome way to think about getting your first negative reviews. I don't think I've ever heard a fellow author kind of talk about it like that. You either get the camp that says, I don't read reviews in order to protect my mental health / continue to write. And then you get the people who are obsessed with the reviews, and any negative review they get, it like ruins their entire, like you said, I'm sure, of course you get it. And you're like, oh my gosh, like it's a hit to the gut.
Sure.
But to turn that on its head and just say like it reached outside of the audience that really enjoys it is a really unique perspective, and one that I will definitely be taking home after this.
Good.
Yes, Mick talked a lot about the meta process for highs and lows, and to the end question, of course. I think we're much better off than we were from where we started, right? I feel like that's sort of inevitable if you have any sort of forward motion, right? Like I said, you embellished my quote a little bit, right? But this is a sequel. So our processes have been refined. We work well together. We have the characters, the background, all that stuff's ahead. There's just inertia also behind everything. And to be fair, and I hate to say it because it makes me feel old, but we've aged. I mean, we've gotten older. We have more life experience, right? Highs and lows, like we're saying. And that feeds into it. I'd like to think that I'm a better writer because of, process things that we've done to make ourselves better writers deliberately, but also because of what's happened in the world, in our lives, et cetera, right? And I believe, I said, damn, Mick will get me later for saying I think, right? I believe strongly, right, that what we write is somehow going to be a reflection of the person that is putting it to paper, right? And the highs and lows in the process, Mick talk about the highs and lows in the writing are what keeps me into it also, right? We've had some nights or some morning, whatever time of day it was, especially recently. There's some heavy things in the sequel, no spoilers or anything, right, yet. But there's some really heavy stuff. And sometimes we finish or we come to a decision and it's just dead air, right? And it's sometimes it's like, wow, we can't believe that that's what it's going to be. Right? Because we don't, people talk about do you plant stuff or do you do a linear process? We do a little bit of both. So we don't exactly know where certain people are going to end up or how things are going to go necessarily. Or, broad brushes, of course. But sometimes they'll just be like, wow, we just wrote this into where it's going to be. And wow, this is what it's going to be for this person. Like, this is how they're going to go.
It is so much fun having
it's a gut punch at the same time. It's fun. But it's also like, wow. And it's something we've spent, or a character or something we either made from scratch or was based on someone we knew at one point. And it's hard to, go through a whole story arc with somebody and be like, dang, that's how it is, isn't it? Because our stories, sometimes a brutal mess, it's rough. And there's some times where I come away from either editing or writing, this story, I'm like, I'm sad. You know what I mean? It didn't go so good. Not because the writing was bad, but because of how it made us feel. And I think that's a good tell of that we're on the right track. Ultimately, at least for me, it's a good tell. So,
yeah. Well, I think that's a great point. I'm sure Brandon feels this way too. Like, as you're writing, at least we are working through writing our first draft of our first novels, and you know, when you have to do something to a character, or you have to do something for the plot that's gonna devastate somebody, or like irreparably change the plot line, you sit there after a session and you're just like, oh shit, I did this. Like, I made this happen, and it makes you feel so many mixed emotions.
Yeah.
And that's great. Yeah. Like you said, David, it's important, because if you're feeling that, then you hope it reflects correctly to the readers as well.
And that's, to Mick's point, I guess, into what you just said, that's exactly what I was thinking when you said it. Because what Mick gets from like getting reviews and things like that, I get it when people in like the Discord or someone will get that same feeling that we got.
Yeah.
When someone says, this is how it made me feel, then that's where I'm like, wow, we really did it. You know, that's what we got. Yeah. Listening to someone, watching someone read it and get to a part and just be like, I can't believe that. Like, once, if feeling that same emotion with someone else and knowing that we impacted that on that person is what gives me the,
I never thought I would enjoy making so many people cry. One of my favorite messages to get is "You made me cry" or "How dare you." I get so many messages. Like, it's one of the, I always know where someone is because I get, "Oh my God, how dare you! I'm so angry at you."
Yeah.
You know, and like we don't relish the expiration of our characters, right?
The sadness. Yeah.
Well, we're not writing character deaths for the point of making the audience sad. We're writing it as a natural progression of the story and how things play out for those characters. And it's a side effect, you know, and it's so incredibly rewarding to realize that the words we put on paper are evoking a physical, emotional response from somebody.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That just like
that.
words on paper can do that. So it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yes, that's why we do it.
It is.
All right, Ash,
Brandon,
I'm thinking.
One more question?
I'm thinking one more question, then we open the floor to audience questions before we wrap up. But
awesome.
Yeah, I'll let you pick the final question, Ash.
Oh goodness. Okay.
Pressure's on.
See. Give me pressure. I know. Oh my gosh. Goodness.
I know there's so many.
Okay. I think we touched on most of these in general, but one we haven't really touched on. And this kind of leads into a question that we ask every time we come on, which is like, what's your resource for the week? So talk to us about the types of writing tools you guys used, if any. I'm thinking like, you've got platforms like Scrivener or even just like Google Docs that you used or you would recommend or not recommend to fellow writers. And how did those help in your like organization and productivity?
Oh Lord, we've tried multiple different apps and things like world building tools and campfire things and stuff, and have never really been able to really work like consistently put the information into them that we need to, because I'm so busy writing this stuff that I don't have time to go in and do all the extra world building stuff. Like I've got my main like reference magic guide document stuff. We do 99% of what we do through Google Docs that we share with each other. Everything is broken down in one. I've got a master document with links to each individual chapter, which is broken down with some like ABC. A is here's the synopsis, B is the song we choose, because we always choose a song for every chapter we work on that we feel fits the vibe of it, just as a mental exercise that we get to put into a playlist that we put in the book as well with a QR code and stuff. But there is a tool recently that I've discovered, and so let me be very clear. I am anti-generative AI. Okay? Google Notes has come out with this AI program that is self-contained, so it doesn't take anything you upload to it and put it anywhere else or use it to train anything else. It's just a notes organizer, which I'm forgetting the name of. And it can generate, in a very spooky way, a podcast based on the notes that you put together and upload to it. And it generated a 10-minute podcast. I uploaded my full first book's manuscript to it, and it generated a podcast that was genuinely freaky with the level of analysis it did. But I've been going in there and plugging stuff into it and saying like, hey, create a character list for me. And then I go back behind it because it's not going to be 100% accurate. And I edit it down and that trims stuff up. And I go, hey, create a list, a glossary of foreign words, fantasy words that we made up in it, types it all out for me, and I go in and I edit it and improve it.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's a new tool that I find to be very helpful. And it's like, hey, can you analyze this relationship for me? And if the AI can pick up on what we're trying to put down, which is freaky enough on its own, but there's a degree of encouragement as an author, and in that we're doing this well enough that the system is able to pick up what we're trying to do, and we can see where we're failing. So there's a relationship in book one that a lot of people didn't pick up on, being a relationship that the AI also didn't pick up on. Now, that's a difference between humans and AI, whereas there are enough humans picked up on the fact that this was an established relationship by the end, that I'm like, okay, it is there, but the AI wasn't. So it sort of gives me a way to measure, going into beta reads, what areas we want to try and focus on and study and ask questions about. So it's a tool. Do your own research, be careful and whatnot. I'm never going to upload the podcast anywhere. I think that would be a dishonest and not a good idea. But
don't do that.
it is.
Yeah, I listened to 5 minutes of it, and it was the scariest thing ever. Don't do that.
Yeah,
I did not see the light of day.
Yeah, Notebook
In a
Ellen.
gross way. I didn't like it.
Yeah, Notebook Ellen. I was fascinated by it. I found it very encouraging, but also like, well, we're doomed. But I think it's definitely a tool to where someone asked me, they're like, how did you get yours to be so clear and concise? And my response was not to be arrogant, but just wrote a good book. It understood.
Did it. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a tool. I think it should be used carefully and sparingly, but I think it could be incredibly helpful, especially if you're as scatterbrained as I am, and you struggle to go back through and condense things and make lists and stuff when it's all in your head somewhere.
Yeah. Briefly, yeah, we use Google Docs. I'm a game master for fun, and I've tried every, I think, iteration of Dungeon, Smoke, Spark, Notes, Fog, all those Dungeon Master, Game Master kind of tools. I haven't found one that I liked. I'd be happy to be wrong if someone found me one that I really could appreciate that was intuitive, but it's going to be hard to beat just having a couple of Word documents together. Honestly, what I've been doing recently, and it's been the same thing I've done for game mastering recently, is I have my own Discord, and I plug my stuff into my own Discord and have channels on my Discord. That's my own. Honestly, it seems it's such a strange thing to do, but since I spend so much time in Discord, taking care of business or whatever else I'm going to be doing there, that's where I drop all my things for my campaigns, and that's where I drop things for writing now.
You have a writing Discord that I'm not in? For yourself, for our book?
Okay. All right now.
Secrets out,
All
Dave.
Right. If you want to see my big bad evil guy notes for my Star Wars RPG campaign, feel free, dude. But
okay, it's just your own palace. Got it.
So yeah, Google Docs and Discord. That's all I'm using. If someone has something better, please, I'm open. I'm open to hear it. So.
No, I think that's actually really helpful to hear, like, you using Discord and then you using Google together is just a good reminder that you don't need often what people sell you to make it work. And I think we kind of, at least me personally, I'm one of the people who's like, ooh, shiny new toy. But because you're like, oh, maybe this will make my life easier. But then at the end of the day, you're more distracted by learning how to use the program than you are actually writing. So that is I think, a great reminder to me, at least personally, that sometimes simplicity is the key.
I'm very much in the camp of the simpler the better. Like, I've tried things like Campfire, World Anvil. There's a million of them.
That was it. So I was close.
And I get too distracted not writing, or it takes too much time to put my notes into the app that I'm like, I can't do this. For me, just having like a master document for everything and then like linking to separate documents works the best. It makes me the most productive in my writing, because a lot of those tools, they have like really fancy features and it's all nice, but it doesn't help me write. Like it's all cool, but it's fun, but it doesn't help the writing any more than me having it scattered in a Google Doc does, if I'm being honest. So I'm very, very simple in that regard. I also like that you touched on like an AI tool that you found to be kind of, ethical in the way you used it, because we've talked at length about generative AI as well. And obviously there's a lot of concerns around like, what does that mean for creative industries? But I think there are ways to use, AI tools, obviously do your research, find the ones that aren't stealing and training on your data and things like that. But I think there are plenty of like ethically sourced AI tools that authors can take advantage of and can help you, especially with things like organization. I use AI to organize my notes all the time. It's just much faster than I could possibly do it. I will never let it create for me. I won't let it write for me or do like my book covers or anything. I think that's awful. But as far as letting it do like busy work for me and stuff like that, I'm totally on board, as long as I'm doing my research and making sure the tools I'm using aren't secretly training on the notes that I'm putting in and stuff like that. But
of course they are.
I mean, there are people who argue that by having everything on Google Docs, Google is already learning from it anyway. So what can you do?
Yeah.
What can you do? You can't win.
You can't win.
Literally.
Yeah.
Right. Real quick, Nicole, this episode it'll still be on YouTube and Spotify and everything. So I'm sorry that you missed most of it, but you are not a fake fan. We love seeing you in the chat.
No,
so.
Nicole. So I think that's probably the end of our list of questions, right, Brandon?
Yeah.
I think we're gonna give a few minutes to see if anyone has some last minute questions. I did catch one earlier as we kind of like let people ask any that they want to, from Tom Myers earlier.
Oh, I love Tom.
He asked, has there ever been a book that you didn't like but you still learned something from it? If you want to like quick fire what it is, if any, and why.
Ooh. A book you didn't like.
Fourth
I'm not
Wing.
trying to get
I have
canceled.
one. Did you say Fourth
I
Wing?
did.
I was gonna say Fourth Wing too.
Hey, there you go. That's a good one. That's a good example. Yeah, no. Oh man, I didn't finish that.
Rough one for sure.
The lesson I would take from that is that if you're going to have a character whose one of their defining characteristics is a disability, don't forget they have it. As someone with disabilities, I didn't really need the book to teach me that, but
Sure. That's a good point, though. David, do you have any off the top
most
of your
of the
head?
time that I stop a book, I think I like to pick and choose books pretty good. I like to know going in before if I'm going to be, at least a reasonable expectation that I'm going to be okay on it. Most of the time it's nonfiction like that. And within the last 2 weeks, while I've been getting all this together, I was reading some nonfiction stuff in the vein of what my work used to be. And there's so many people that's introductions are just so pompous. And there's no need for that. There's no need for any of that. Like I said earlier, if what you're writing is good and the work that you say that you have done is good, I'm going to find out in about 5 minutes, right? You don't have to tell me how awesome it is.
Right.
I'm going to learn. Like, and that's, I can't and not the writer being like, I'm so good, but like, just, sometimes you need to establish qualifications or what. That's totally fine.
Sure.
But there's a way to do that without being pompous.
We can even have a joke in our book about pompous titles.
You might be the world's expert on this, but now I don't even want to read it. So I guess you got to be humble, right? We could be the best at whatever we're doing. You still have to be humble about it. There's, at least in my previous profession here, about to be previous profession, there's always a bigger fish, man. There's always somebody cooler than you that's done a cooler guy thing than you, that's the space shuttle door gunner, that's whatever, the coolest thing ever, right? And you got to be humble. We're all in this together, right? I think back to the Hemingway thing. This is a Hemingway thing. We're all apprentices in a craft where no one becomes a master. Right. You can't get a big head about this. You can't do that.
That's a great line.
We do have a question from Megan, which says, which creature is your favorite? I'm not sure if this is limited to fantasy creatures, so spit out whatever creature you want. But
they're
like,
in your book.
maybe pick one from Paragon
Exordium.
Sure, let's pick one from your book.
Oh God. Creature. Like, she wants me to say Hotch, probably. We have a dog in the book who's the only character I'm not allowed to hurt because my wife will hurt me if I do.
I think a lot of people would 100% if you
do. It's the only plot armor character in the entire series is Hotch, the military dog. My favorite creature is in book 2. It is their name is Annabelle. She is a Drite, which is like a cross between a sprite and a dragon. She's a little cat-sized dragon named Annabelle, and I love her, and she's adorable, and I would love to have a cat-sized dragon that follows me around and nibbles on my ear and just does funny little noises.
Also, you're now officially not allowed to do anything horrible to Annabelle because that just sounds way too adorable. So, yeah, add that to the list, maybe?
See, if I don't tell my wife about the animal, I can hurt the animal.
Sounds a little crazy.
We'll just forward her this clip from the podcast.
She might be in the audience right now.
Right.
Hi.
All right, David. What's yours? Do you have one?
Oh, without book 2 spoilers. Okay, well, in the book that is already published, creatures that I like that are the sentient creatures. I obviously would go back and forth. The one that is the fan favorite is the basilisk, which is the big snake at the beginning.
You were looking for Shadowfang, weren't you, Megan?
Interesting creature right now, or at least interesting creature I'm fixated on now is Liaradu, which is a dryad, because of things that get set in motion in the story that are gonna. I like it because of it's an interesting character because they're so unique in that their motivations are very simple but diametrically opposite, but yet we can still somehow find ground. But they're just not. They're putting on a face for the audience and for the characters, but that's not right. My favorite kinds of creatures are like the original Alien, where you don't see the alien to the last 10 minutes. It's the ones that have the mystery to them and not just big and scary. And that creature, sentient or not, has a lot more story to tell. That's not just I'm a friendly tree person, and that's why I like those kinds of creatures. So.
Megan was specifically looking for there's a basilisk in book 1 called Shadowfang, who is her favorite character because it's a giant talking snake that can freeze you with a glance. And let me tell you, if you aren't convinced on the audiobook, there's a pinned video on my profile of what the narrator does with that voice, and it will give you chills. The things our narrator was incredible, and it blew my mind how many times he, without direction, understood what we were trying to do and just brought it to life.
That sounds amazing. I'm really excited to listen to it.
You've sold me on the basilisk. I think they're very underrepresented in fantasy, and they're some of my favorite creatures.
Oh, you're going to love Shadowfang.
All right, well, I think that's going to do it for the audience questions. I just want to say a big thank you to Mick and David for being our very first guests, and I think making this our most successful Quill and Query episode yet. Yes. So great job, guys. Yeah, it's awesome. You guys were great. Hope we didn't stumble too much, but thank you so much for being our first, and we'd love to have you on again in the future, maybe for the sequel. But
always.
Do you guys have any closing thoughts you would like to share with the audience before we sign off for the night?
Well, the live audience can't hear Dave, but I will say Lumeni, which is Elvish in my book for May You Walk Under Blue Skies.
Aww,
the live audience can't hear me, so I can say whatever I want. No. I'm not cool enough on TikTok to be able to do this right now. It'd be nice if I could, but honestly, I don't know if that's really what's best for me in the long run, is to be able to do that. Yeah, thanks for having us. Happy to come on and talk. The community, like we said throughout this, I think a big theme was the community is what makes this, so much better to do. So staying in touch and keeping this all going is great. And we'd love to come back for when the site comes out. So.
Always, you're always
definitely.
Welcome. Yep. Well, thank you both again, and thanks to our audience who joined us. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Bye.